Hi, and welcome to Dark Window. I'm your host, Jim Mann. Here on this program, I will be talking with many of the leading investigators, researchers, and authors on the topics of UFOs, UAPs, alien abductions, extraterrestrials, and a host of many other fascinating and related topics. So please join me and my guest for the next hour as we reach out. This is Dark Window on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. And hello, everyone. I'm Jim Mann, your host. Welcome to Dark Window. I have a very special guest with me here in the studio tonight, Kathleen Marden. Now, Kathleen has been a friend of mine for years. She provides a very special and unique service to a lot of folks who have experienced the UFO phenomena. And so welcome, Kathleen. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Jim, and I'm doing fantastic.
So you're down there in Florida where
Yes.
it's nice and warm. I'm out here in Arizona where it's nice and cold, believe it or not, right now. But Kathleen, it's great to have you. And I'm going to get the show on the road here because we've only got about 50 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. And so,
Okay.
Kathleen, I brought you on to talk to you a little bit about what you do for MUFON. And my first question is, what is your history with MUFON? Why are you in MUFON?
Well, I joined the Mutual UFO Network in 1991. And my reason for doing that was I wanted to go to a source that had some inside information that I couldn't purchase in a bookstore, for example. And also, I wanted to have some formal training on how to conduct an abduction investigation. That's what we called it in those days. And I had the great honor to be able to observe some of the early investigators in action, such as Dr. James Harder from APRO, and met Alan Hynek when I was a teenager.
Right.
And Jim Harder, even when I was in my 20s and 30s. I was very impressed by the investigators that I met. And I always thought, gee, I would love to do that too. And I wanted to investigate my aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill's
Right.
experience that took place in 1961. Now, there was a lot of evidence, but I wanted to do the most thorough investigation that anyone had ever done. So I really needed training to know exactly what to do. And I had that training through MUFON, and I became a field investigator. I was a state section director in New Hampshire. And then after that, I became MUFON's director of field investigator training, did that for 10 years. And then I was the director and founder, actually, of MUFON's Experiencer Research Team, which is now the Experiencer Resource Team. And I did that for another 10 years. And at the present time, I'm an advisor, a consultant, and I sit on the executive committee of the ERT.
Oh, great. And how many people are on this team?
We have about 60 now.
Wow, really?
Yes.
So they're all across the country, or are they worldwide or just here in the US or?
We have them around the world and
Okay.
in the United States. And it's great because they're all field investigators. So they specialize in doing this type of investigation, but they wear two hats because they also speak confidentially to experiencers who have had these contact experiences and are having some difficulty in dealing of coping with their experiences. Right. So they help them with this.
So that's a very special thing that you do for people. And I don't know, is there anybody else in doing this besides MUFON's ERT?
I'm aware that there is another organization that does it as well. It's directed by Lester Velez, and it's
Okay.
called Opus.
Opus, I think I've
They're
heard.
much smaller, but
Right.
they do the same kind of thing.
Well, that's interesting. Now, do you think that you'd be interested in UFOs and ETs, and you would be this involved if it had not been for your aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill? Where would you be? Would you be involved in this?
If my family hadn't had these experiences, I don't think that I would be involved in it. My interest came because of what happened to my aunt and uncle in 1961, some continuing events afterward,
Mm-hmm.
my mother's missing time event as well, and then my own. And what my mother and I remembered being taken to craft when I was 17 years old. And I've only recently revealed that. I thought I would take it to my grave as my mother did. But, I was concerned about my public image and criticism. And
Sure
then
you
I
are.
thought, what the heck? I don't care any longer.
Well,
I
I'm
don't
glad
care
you
what
thought
anyone
that
thinks.
because I think I've known you for some time, probably about 15 years.
Mhm.
And I've seen the work that the ERT does. I saw MUFON as it came forward and put the ERT team together and put you guys out there. And as a state director, I would send experiencers your direction.
Mhm.
And I was so glad we had that service in MUFON. You guys have done an excellent job over the years.
Well, thank you. I think it's really important for people to be able to go to a non-judgmental listener who is just compassionate and is there because, uh, we're not leading anyone to think that something happened when
Mhm.
it didn't or anything like that. It's just that emotional support that is so important and so difficult to find elsewhere.
And I noticed you mentioned your family.
Yes.
When did you find out that your mom and dad, or was it your mom and dad, or was it your entire family that had this UFO experience? It's when did you
I only
find?
found, yeah, I only found out on September 20th, 1961, the same day that my aunt and uncle returned home after being abducted.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah. And then uh, I think it was after that I became aware that this was happening, that I found out that my mother had had a close encounter, a sighting back in the 1950s, but she wasn't aware of having been taken. But then it was sometime when I was a teenager when she was late in returning home from a grocery shopping trip. She went every Friday night.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
so my father was concerned. My two brothers and I were. Um, we went to bed, but we couldn't sleep. We were so worried about her because she always returned home at the same time. And she finally did return home very late at night. And she didn't realize she was late. The ice cream was soup. The frozen food had melted,
Really?
and she had no explanation for what had happened. And eventually, I figured out what it was.
Well, so you had an experience yourself, correct?
Yes,
And how old were you at that point?
I was 17 years old when I had my first conscious recall of finding myself on a craft.
Really?
And my mother was there as well. It was during a time when my aunt was doing a series of contact experiments with a team of scientists. They would script her. She would try to send telepathic messages to these ETs and ask them to go to a certain location at a certain date. And I later found out that she and my grandmother had sort of an agreement that these ETs would come to the family farm. I grew up across the street. And that they would land and they would go to the house, and that my grandmother would give them a cup of coffee. That's what she said. That was sort of a joke. And of course, she never thought that would happen. But a craft did come in one night and this was 1965. April of 1965. And my grandmother woke up. She saw it coming in. A neighbor of ours, who was a commercial pilot returning home from work, saw the craft coming in too. And the next day, my brothers and I went out and we found physical trace evidence on the ground.
Wow.
And some trees that appeared to have been sheared off. The trees died.
So you guys actually found very real empirical data.
Yes, we did.
There.
And there was an investigation too. UFO investigators came out, but my mother and I did not mention that we had been on that craft. I only remembered being on a table and in my mother's presence, and that these entities were around me. I couldn't remember what their faces looked like. For years and years, I tried to remember their faces. And then eventually, I had a very powerful abreaction, and I did remember what they looked like. And they looked like the entities that my aunt and uncle saw, who took them to craft. That makes sense.
Let me ask you this. In general, throughout the entire family, how did the family react to your aunt and uncle when they came out about this? Did your family receive that well? Was there a lot of, am I asking the right question here?
Yeah, let me explain that, because there are two things going on here.
Okay.
We were all sworn to secrecy. This story was never going to be made public. Betty and Barney were willing to speak to the scientists who were investigating the case. It was the first scientifically investigated, what they called UFO abduction in the United States.
It was, yes.
Yes. And so the family initially was very supportive of Betty and Barney. We saw the emotional reaction that they had. Betty's curiosity, her search for answers, and Barney's reticence about having anyone know about this. He said to Betty, I don't ever tell anyone about this. This is just before she went to the phone and called my mother. And then he kept saying, we have to forget about this. No good can ever come of it. And so, it really bothered him. It weighed on him. I'm sure that that's why he had a deeper reaction than Betty did. She was curious. He was traumatized. He is the person who had conscious recall of observing these non-humans looking down at him while he was standing in that field in North Lincoln, New Hampshire, on the night of September 19, actually the 20th at about midnight. And he had the impression that they had a plan, and that plan was to, quote, capture him like a bug in a net, close quote.
Really?
So he felt threatened. He saw that they were not human. And this is, I think, what remained with him, that memory. And then running to the car and hearing those buzzing sounds that caused a tingling sensation to pass through his and Betty's bodies and for the car to vibrate. This is before they lost conscious recall. And so, and then they had conscious recall again, but they always knew they were missing time. And they had all that physical evidence too that was weighing on them. You know, Barney had the tops of his shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to buy new shoes, but he didn't have a memory of how that occurred. He could only imagine how that occurred.
Yeah, and this took them both completely by surprise.
Right. And Betty's dress torn, and their watches that didn't run again. So many things, the shiny spots on the trunk of the car that caused a compass to spin and spin, indicating a magnetic field. There was all of that. And so the family was really very supportive until that information was released as the result of a violation of confidentiality. And it was published in a Boston newspaper for 5 days in a row. It went around the world. I have a newspaper from Australia where the same story ran.
Seriously.
Yes.
So, I mean, when this thing finally hit, it was like wildfire across the world, and it went all the way down to Australia. Now, later on in life, you wrote a book. Now,
yes, I did.
You have an updated version of that book, which is 60th anniversary edition. But tell me, what was it that actually moved you to write this book and with Stan Friedman?
Well, I had been a teacher and an education services coordinator. Before that, I was a social worker. So that was my professional career. I'm college educated. But initially in college, I wanted to become a writer. I loved writing. I loved writing poetry. I had some poetry published when I was a teenager. And I ended up having a close encounter with a craft, and I was burned. When I was returned, I was burned. I had hair loss. I had weight loss. I was very, very ill.
Really?
Yes, I was. And as a result of that, I lost my career. And so I was at home, just too weak to really do anything. But I wanted the intellectual stimulation of doing something because I had a very intellectually stimulating career. And I thought, what can I do? Well, I've always wanted to know more about my aunt and uncle's case. And I had read everything that the skeptics and disinformants that I've later learned had written about it. And so I wanted to separate fact from fiction. And I thought, this is something I can do. I can do the research. And when I feel well, I can do the investigation. And fortunately, I have a very supportive husband. And even though I wasn't really strong, I was still suffering, my husband drove me anywhere that I wanted to go. So I was able to go along the close encounter route. I was able to go along the entire route that Betty and Barney took on when they were on that vacation to Niagara Falls and up to through Canada and back down through New Hampshire in the same time frame, stopping in the same general areas that Betty and Barney did to see what I would do. One of the debunkers said that Betty and Barney were so tired by the time they saw that craft that they must have been hallucinating. Well, my husband and I were much older than Betty and Barney were at that time, We had followed the same route and the same time frame, and we weren't hallucinating. I just wanted to check it out. I wanted to check out every single argument
Well,
to
that was
see if it was true or if it was false.
when
And
did you?
that's what I did for many years. And I was slowly writing. And so by the time my aunt died in 2004, she knew I was writing her biography initially, but then it became much more than a biography. And after she died, I had written a great deal. I wasn't finished, but my aunt had said to me, if you need any assistance in publishing that book, I recommend that you get in touch with Stanton Friedman. She said, I trust him. Of course, one of Stanton's first very large projects was the verification of the star map that Betty had seen on the craft, and that Marjorie Fish, a brilliant woman from Ohio, had spent many years on attempting to identify the stars. And so Stanton was familiar with my aunt and uncle's case. He had met both of them. Barney had died shortly after he met him. He died in 1969.
Okay.
But Stanton knew my aunt quite well. And so I just got in touch with Stanton and told him that I'd written most of a book, and would he be interested in joining me in vetting my work and in helping me to write the remainder of the book.
And that book was finally published when? And what?
It was
year?
published, the first edition was published in 2007.
2007. And now that was this book. And now
Yes.
you have an updated version of that book. And what are the differences? What did you add? What did you take away? What were the revisions that you made, Kathleen?
Well, I updated some things in the old text in the book, but then I wrote a new chapter on it, more or less a scientific update. I have never stopped looking for evidence, and for scientists who would test that evidence. And so there is an update on the star map that was done, I believe it was in 2014 by an astrophysicist. There's also new evidence on Betty's dress, including DNA evidence. And I was very excited about this because I was at the University of New Hampshire doing a television show with Ben Hansen for the Travel Channel. And Ben Hansen, of course, for people who don't know this, he is a former FBI agent, worked for the FBI. And we were examining Betty's dress. And of course, I had examined it before, and other scientists had as well. But I had never selected the front of the lining of the dress for laboratory analysis. I'd always get to pick one thing or one little part of the dress. And so Ben actually pointed out the front of the dress in the area of Betty's navel, and that there were stains there. And he thought they looked like blood. And we checked to see if that had leaked through to the surface, the outside of the dress, or if it could possibly have leaked through the outside of the dress. Maybe she spilled a drink. But no, there was nothing on the exterior of the dress, only on the lining. And it appeared to have come from her body out. So then I'm always the person who has to cut that sample. I set up that collection.
So,
and I did. And I sent it to our MUFON laboratory.
And
Lynn Mann, who does the DNA analysis for the Mutual UFO Network, discovered that it was Betty's DNA and that it was from fluid that had leaked from her body.
From the inside.
From the inside, in the area of her navel. And so it links that stain to Betty's testimony that these ETs had inserted a needle into her navel.
And all of this is in that book.
Yes.
Star chart. Do you have illustrations in this book with the star chart and things like that?
Yes, the star chart is in there. The state of New Hampshire has erected a historical marker for Betty and Barney, and that is also in the book. There is also another test that was done, an academic study done in the chemistry laboratory of a university, and they have found some very interesting metal fragments on Betty's dress too. You can read all about that in Captured. So there's a lot of new information that I have put in there to update it.
And that is the world's first documented alien abductions. And now, I didn't write this down, and we didn't discuss this earlier, Kathleen, but there was a movie that I saw years ago with James Earl Jones in it. And I found
Parsons.
Yes, and I found that movie fascinating. But I remember I was a fairly young man back then, and I sat and watched that movie, and it was different.
Mm-hmm.
And it just rang so perfect with me because I've got an experience myself. But
Yes.
So where can we find this book? Captured.
That book is available at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can order it from any bookstore, or you can order an autographed copy via PayPal at my website at Kathleen-Marden.com.
And I tell you, I've read that book,
mm-hmm.
and it's excellent. You did an
Thank
excellent job. Now, aside from being an author, and speaking of being an author, there you go. Kathleen,
mm-hmm.
You've got a lot of stuff out there.
I do. I've been busy, and I remain busy. I'm working on a new book too. Actually, 2 new books.
This right here, Extraterrestrial Contact and Forbidden Knowledge. Now, which is the newest? The latest?
Forbidden Knowledge is the newest.
Okay, a personal journey from alien abduction to spiritual transformation. That's a lot. And
Yes.
I wish we had time to talk about that spiritual transformation from the alien abduction that a lot of folks seem to go through, correct?
Yes,
okay,
academic studies have shown that, and my own studies and the studies I have worked on with others, with academics, have borne this out.
You have been involved in this in quite some time. Now, you have worked on 3 major studies on experiencers of ET contact. So what have you learned, and where can we find this information today? That's one of the questions.
Well, I have learned a great deal,
yeah.
And I have written about it in the Alien Abduction Files. That was the first study.
Mm-hmm.
In the second study that I worked on, it was with the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounters. And you can read about it in Free's book, Beyond UFOs. I have a chapter in that book as well. And then in my latest, in Extraterrestrial Contact, there is some information in there as well. So yeah, it's Extraterrestrial Contact, where you can read about my latest study with the Mutual UFO Network. I presented that in 2018 at a conference, and Dr. Don C. Don Derry did phase 2 of the study. He was responsible for that, and we worked together on that. So we both spoke about that. You might be able to purchase the lectures from the Mutual UFO Network store.
Mhm.
And we also have those papers published in the proceedings from 2018, the Mutual UFO Network proceedings, that you might be able to purchase on MUFON's website.
Perfect. Now, Kathleen, I've got some notes here that you have been quite a visible individual over the last few years. You've been on Ancient Aliens. You've been on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, the Science Channel, Fox Network Channel, on several documentaries.
Mhm.
What has your experience been with all of these? When you go on these documentaries, do you just comment? Do you talk about this incident with Barney and Betty, or just the experience or knowledge in general? What do they find so fascinating about Kathleen Marden on these
Well, it
documentaries?
depends. It really depends upon the production company.
Mhm.
Of course, all of them are interested in Betty and Barney, but I've gone way beyond that on commonalities that experiencers share, um, on working with experiencers, on a little bit about my own experiences as well. So it really depends upon the production, and most of them are just wonderful to work with. I've
Yeah.
worked with only, I think, 3 in the history of the number of years that I've been doing this, and it's been quite a long time, that were not good, that didn't edit it well, that were actually there only to disinform the public about what I said and about reality.
Yeah. So you've been at this a very long time.
Mhm.
Um, can you sort of elaborate a little bit more on your experience, your personal experience while you were working the ERT? Now, it's not experiencer research, it's experiencer resource now, correct?
Now it is, yes.
Is there a reason why we changed that?
There is. I was still director when we changed it, and I believe we changed it in 2021. Um, the reason for that is team members, as the team grew, they were saying, "Research? What kind of research are we doing?" And I said, "Well, we did research from 2015 to 2018." And they said, "But we're not researching, we're providing resources to people. Can we change
Perfect.
the name? We're helping people." So people presented a lot of different names that they could come up with, but I wanted it to remain the ERT, as did MUFON leadership.
Yeah.
And so we came up with the Experiencer Resource Team.
So now you're on the resource team.
Yes.
What do you do? What do you actually do? Say person comes to you that has an experience. What do you do?
Well, I don't do that for the team anymore. I do that privately. And of course, I'm
Okay,
a hypnotherapist too.
that
So
you are.
people can contact me through my website for that. Um, but what I used to do that. I did it until 2021, when I decided to semi-retire because I had so many other things going on in my life, and I wanted to spend time with my husband. And so I wanted to remain with the team, but I wanted to do something that was manageable for me. So what I do now is I'm on the executive committee. So when any decisions are made about the team, and the direction we're moving in, or if there's any kind of a problem, I'm on that committee that makes that decision. I'm also making training videos for the ERT so that new members who come in can watch these training videos. And we're setting up a formal training program. We've always had monthly meetings, and we've done a lot of training during those monthly meetings, but we're starting a mentorship program. And I'm not heading that. We have somebody else who's the head of it, but I'm assisting by developing training materials.
Perfect. When someone reports a UFO, to move on, and they have an experience to tell, how does all of this get channeled to the ERT? Is that a trick question?
It's a little tricky because it keeps changing.
It keeps changing.
Well, it used to be, and I'm not certain if it still is, but people used to be able to go directly to the ERT to fill out a questionnaire. But I think that they now have to go to report to the website at mufon.com and report an ET sighting or a sighting of a non-human or contact event, something like that. And then they get to choose whether they actually have an investigation or if they can go directly to the ERT to speak with someone without having an investigation. Now, I know there are those who are, that's pretty contentious because there are those who want everyone to have an investigation. But you know as well as I do that not everyone's ready emotionally to be interrogated or even to be questioned. It's very, very hard.
Do you talk to these folks personally over the phone? Is that how you do it? When someone comes to you with let's say someone applies, and I don't know if they still do this. I'm not a state director anymore. We used to have to take our witness and have him apply to the ERT. And then you guys would contact that person. And do you talk personally over the phone? Is that how that works?
The ERT does.
Yeah.
Members of the ERT talk personally over the phone with that individual. If people come to me personally and they schedule a consultation with me through my website, then I do it via Zoom if they don't mind having me with them and seeing them. Otherwise, I can do it via the phone. But it's good for people if they can do a Zoom meeting with me, because I've developed certain abilities, and those abilities are channeled down through my crown chakra. I have a tingling sensation in the top of my head. If a person has a question, if I have this electrical tingling, it means yes. If I don't, if it goes away, it means no.
Oh, really?
You know, it's that kind of thing. And I can also accomplish some healing to help people.
You know, Kathleen, this is very interesting. I'd love to talk to you further on that, and we will, if I can have you back again. And we will expand on that. So those that are interested in that particular, what is that, a gift, would you say? Special insight?
I think of it as a gift. I'm a quantum healing hypnosis practitioner. So I initially started this through my training with Dolores Cannon, and I'm considered to be at a master level in doing that type of hypnosis. But we learn healing we learned it through Dolores, but it was contacting the higher self. Somewhere along the line, I started to channel this healing. It just came to me, came through the top of my head and out through my arms. If I have a person in my office where I do hypnosis, if I hold my hands out over the top of their body, they can feel heat. Some feel tingling in the parts of the body where they're having a problem. I've just started to begin to try to do distance healing with people, and I've been successful. I've only worked with a couple of people with that, but it's been successful with both of them. It takes longer than if they're in my presence and they have, I tape record it, or I should say voice record it. They receive the recording and they have to meditate and listen to that. But they're having remarkable healing.
Well, I can tell the listeners that I've known Kathleen, I've known you a long time, and these particular insights and gifts that people have are becoming more and more out in the open, you could say. I think that we're finally getting past that giggle factor.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing the gifts that humans actually possess if you are allowed to practice those gifts. And I want to go back and talk with you. I mean, I've got 1,000 questions in my head right now, Kathleen, but we're down to just a few minutes. Do you have a favorite recent case that you've investigated, that you've worked on?
Oh, I do. And I'm going to be writing about this in the book that I'm working on now.
Okay.
This case took place in North Carolina. And it actually happened in 2015, but it was quite a lot later before I actually investigated it, because one of those witnesses was so traumatized, I didn't want to cause further trauma by doing an investigation. So I just supported her. I recommended that she have some treatment for trauma, and worked with her. Finally, when she felt better, she came to me. This involved 3 people. I've spoken with all 3. I've hypnotized 2 of them. One of them was Chris Bledsoe.
Now, let me step in here a minute. When you say that you hypnotized them, what's sort of the thing? Is it a regressive hypnosis? Is it what do you do with a person like that?
I used the quantum healing hypnosis method, but I did not use the questioning technique. I always use forensic hypnosis. So I never ask a direct question. The only time I ever ask a question is if I want more information about something the person has already said. I never lead the witness. So it's the purest form of questioning or hypnosis possible. It used to be used, it used to be permissible in a court of law years ago. And
really?
It's what law enforcement uses.
Very interesting.
Yes, it's before hypnosis fell out of favor back in the, I guess, 1980s, late 1980s.
So
yes.
You're writing a new book.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that book? Is it about this case that you're working on?
I'm going to be talking about different cases. So this case is one of them where 3 people were abducted together. All of the details, the evidence, and I'm going to be showing the evidence because they actually had a video camera set up, and the camera was in another part of the yard, and it actually captured these entities coming in on a beam of light, dropping off that beam. At least I think that's what's happening. Not fully materialized, becoming larger and material as they moved closer to the ground. So I'm going to be showing photographs of those entities, and I'll be talking about the investigation. MUFON actually investigated it too. North Carolina MUFON.
Okay.
It was an unknown. And I'm going to be talking about the testimony and the evidence.
Well, perfect. And what do you have a title for this book yet?
No.
Okay.
I'm also working with Dr. Melanie Barton Bragg,
okay,
who is an ordained minister and a psychotherapist. I've worked with her for several years now. And we're working on a questionnaire, which I'm going to be posting on my website within a few days. And I'll be putting it on Facebook too, for the general public and for experiencers.
You know, that's another thing. People of faith, okay? People that attend church regularly and are involved in a religion, and the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrials.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of conversation we could have. And
that's sort of what our books are going to be about.
It's not what it used to be. Things have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Viewpoints have changed. Understandings have changed. What it means to be a spiritual person nowadays has kind of changed. And
mm-hmm.
I would love to talk about some of those things on this program. So moving on, and we're just about out of time. Do you have plans for any sort of future work? Are you going to be giving talks, presentations at any of the symposiums or conferences around the country?
Yes, I am. I'll be in Pine Bush, New York, in the first weekend in June, and probably Roswell. I haven't heard from them yet. I always hear from the Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Festival. That's sort of something I do just on a regular basis. I've been asked to speak in Michigan in September, I believe.
Really? Michigan?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's
so. As I sign the contracts, I will put those up on my website at Kathleen-Marden.com.
So Kathleen-Marden.com. That's the website. And is that the best place to go to look for your books and for what you've been up to, your work, your research, and all about Kathleen? Is that the best place to go?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's great. You know, we've had a great conversation, Kathleen. Yeah, we're just about out of time here.
Yeah, it was such a pleasure to talk with you again, Jim.
It's always good. You know, I'm going to pull this up here just a minute. Now, what about these books? They're still out there, correct?
Yes, all of them.
And I see some of them are, that Extraterrestrial Contact. These are the new books.
Yeah.
And these are some of all of your older books. And so that's where we need to go. We can get them off Amazon, and we can go to your website, and that's perfect. And I so much thank you for joining me. It's always refreshing to talk to you, Kathleen. And folks, Kathleen's been around a long time, like I said, involved in this. And I've even worked with her. I think you did a little hypnosis session with me one time, and I think I fell asleep.
That was when I was having my training. You may think you fell asleep, but
yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah, I had a lot of.
No, you weren't asleep.
Yeah,
But I'm not going to talk about that. That's confidential.
yes, it is. But anyway, I thank you for joining me. Everyone, thanks for joining Dark Window. And so on behalf of Kathleen Marden and myself, Jim Mann, thank you for joining us. Next week, we'll have another great show and another great guest. And good night.